I would call this a historic record day, Carol Massar, but the NASDAQ 100 down 3%, worst day since December.
Okay, yeah. I mean, a little perspective, right? Isn't that what we do really well, is put it into perspective? I mean, I keep looking at the major equity averages. I mean, you still have almost 350 names in the S&P 500 that are actually up today. Even the NASDAQ 100, more names are up than down. So I just think it's very targeted, it's very specific, and I think there's a lot of questions about what this news really means in terms of the AI investment play going forward.
Well, if you want to see where things are getting hit, one of the areas is the stocks, down more than 9% right now. 27 of the 30 stocks that are in the stocks lower today. Yes, including Broadcom, Nvidia, and Marvell, which are all down double digits.
Yeah, but doesn't this make the earnings calls that we're going to get later on this week a lot more interesting?
Yeah.
Especially with Meta pre-announcing how much it's going to spend on CapEx. You're going to have a lot more interested people listening for hundreds of billions of dollars and whether that still makes sense.
I know. Usually I just kind of wait to read the transcripts, but I'm going to get on these calls now.
We're going to get excited. I do want to point out, though, guys, that commodities are still getting hit pretty much across the board. That feels like you sell what you can, not what you want things. So I appreciate that in the equity market, maybe we're sort of like it's just a tech story, but the follow-through selling there is something.
Well, I'm glad you brought up commodities, too. We kind of forget all the other news flow. Apparently, we were at war with Colombia or something over the weekend.
Which
sent coffee prices up and sent soybeans and other down. And then, of course, some bad data out of China here. Nevertheless, let's just say this could have been a lot worse, folks. We're going to start with the S&P 500 as we get the closing bells. The S&P is still holding that 6,000 level. It is down, though, almost 90 points on the day, or about 1.4%. The NASDAQ composite is down more than 600 points, or 3%. The NASDAQ 100 also roughly down about 646 points, or 3%. If you're looking for a bright spot, there are a couple places you're going to find it. The Dow Jones Industrial Average up 289 points, or roughly about 0.6%. Dow Transports up 242 points, or about 1.5%. And you see the Russell 2000 on the left of your screen there. That did finish the day down by about 1%, but I challenge you, pull it up on your Bloomberg terminal and see what rose and what fell, and you'll get a better sense of market sentiment.
Yeah, so perfect setup going back to the S&P 500, 351 names to the upside in the Monday trade, 152 to the downside. And Scarlet, if you look at the NASDAQ 100, 55 names higher, 46 lower.
Yeah, but there are some big swings in the sectors that mattered here. And let's start with the obvious, which is tech. And it's the biggest slice of the pie, of course, because it's the heaviest weighted sector in the S&P 500. That group losing more than 5.5%. Utilities, as Alex mentioned, down by more than 2%. That, of course, they're the second derivative play of the AI story. But you look at the big gainers here, and your traditional defensive sectors like consumer staples and healthcare. Lori Calvasina of RBC just mentioned financials as a safe haven as well. Each of those group gaining at least 1%.
All right, let's get to some of the individual gainers. Apple, check it out, folks. Reporting on Thursday, outperforming the broader trade in a big way, up about 3.25%. It's the number 4 gainer in the NASDAQ 100 today against that broader sell-off of the NASDAQ 100 and against its own recent weakness. Keep in mind that this one's been under pressure. Apple's down about 10% since late December. Our team noting that while Apple is expected to be a long-term beneficiary of artificial intelligence, especially as its millions of users access AI services through the iPhone and other hardware, it hasn't been devoting billions of dollars to AI capex the way other mega caps have. So maybe a little bit of a rethink, but definitely an outperformer. I want to go to the ADRs of Aurora Mobile. It's a micro cap, small company, $115 million market cap of those ADRs that trade here in the United States. It's a Chinese software and application company, up 141% after it said its enterprise AI platform has incorporated the DeepSeek R1 large language model. So kind of on the coattails of all that news that we got about DeepSeek in today's session. And then just for something different, Vail Resorts, finishing off its highs, but still a gain of about 5.5%. This company was issued a letter from its shareholder, Late Apex Partners, calling the company's performance unacceptable, and says Vail must replace both its CEO and its CFO, reset its board of directors, and cut its dividend by 80%. So that one saw a fair amount of activity.
Can I just also add AT&T?
I know.
Isn't that amazing?
Yeah, I mean, best day in more than a year on the back of, I guess, what were some pretty decent earnings, Carol.
It was a very different trade today.
And a little safety play there.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, let's go to what everybody wants to talk about. Shares of Nvidia today, the biggest decline, I should say, going back to March of 2020. It erased a record amount of stock market value, $589 billion in value. Shares down about 17%. The sell-off today fueled by investor concern around the Chinese AI startup DeepSeek. The latest AI model of DeepSeek that was released last week, it's widely seen as competitive with those from OpenAI and Meta platforms. Apple, for what it's worth, now back to the world's most valuable company after today's decline. Nvidia coming out and saying that DeepSeek is, quote, an excellent AI advancement that complies with U.S. technology export controls. We also saw other companies in the space fall as a result of this news. Broadcom down 17.4% today. It's a key ingredient, of course, in the companies that are designing their own chips. So think Amazon, think Alphabet. So if there's perhaps less need for those, then Broadcom is affected. Once again, shares of Broadcom down double digits today by 17.4%. And finally, the worst performing stock in the S&P 500 today, Vistra Corp, down 28%. Because if you have less of a need for those hyperscale facilities, then you have less of a need for power. And that's why independent power producers got absolutely crushed today. It was actually the best performer in the S&P 500 last year, up more than 260%, but down today by more than 28%.
Yeah, Romaine and I were talking about that earlier, like baby with the bathwater. Like, is that what we're looking at here when it comes to all those derivative plays? Looking at the bond market, it's been a solid bid the whole day across the curve, yet yields are off the lows of the session. Just taking a look, say, at the 10-year, yields ending down by about 9 basis points. At one point, they were off by about 13 basis points. We also got a 2- and 5-year auction. They were fine. Tomorrow, we get the 7-year auction, so watch that as well. The 5-year did pretty well today.
All right. I had mentioned earlier that this is a big week in terms of tech earnings. Which one are you guys looking forward to the most? Because it feels like Meta kind of front run their whole CapEx spending. We already know what the number is going to be, but now the onus is on Microsoft to see whether they do anything.
Okay, so on Meta platforms real quick, I was surprised to see the stock reaction to this announcement late last week, because normally when you see a CapEx announcement go higher, the stock gets hit, but investors were bullish on this. And we also saw Meta platforms, at one point it was down today. Later in the day, it was higher. Investors not selling off the stock today as a result of what we saw from DeepSeek. Do they come out? I mean, Mark Zuckerberg knew about this last week, even with the announcement of increased CapEx spend. Do we see any of these companies pull back?
Well, that's what I'm curious about. I mean, I guess the short answer would seem to be probably no. And I thought you brought up a good point, is a lot of people were talking about this idea that there's no way that these tech CEOs and the other folks beneath them weren't already aware of what DeepSeek was capable of. Like I said, this kind of dates back to late December and then, of course, back to January 9th. As far as what I'm most interested in, to answer Scarlett's question, I kind of want to hear what Apple has to say. Because they were kind of the laggards in this, right? They were the ones everybody said, well, they're behind the curve. Why aren't they spending more money? Why aren't they articulating more of a AI strategy? And I don't know. I kind of feel like, for a variety of reasons, maybe it's kind of better that they didn't.
Well, maybe, but also they just hired a new head of AI, right? So interesting to see sort of the read-through on that. But to your point about CapEx spend, so it feels like 2026 is now what we care about in terms of CapEx spend for these companies. Remember, for Meta in particular, they have Meta Llama, which is open source, right? So something that's open source that's doing really well, it's easily adopted, should be good then a read-through for Meta.
Well, that's the thing that's interesting, right? That if this ultimately is true, and there's still a lot of questions in terms of, their development, DeepSeek and what they found out, and the cost side of that equation. But if it is a lot cheaper, anybody who's been doing the spend, and I will want to know from Meta that, like, do you rethink your spend? That if it's not, you're not going to have to spend the $65 billion. So I do think that it could be a plus for the likes of Meta and Apple, that when they ultimately do, it's going to be a lot cheaper on their CapEx line.
There's also a big question mark about how Washington responds, or whether it responds, because clearly the export controls may have been working, but China was able to get around that and use the lower end chips from Nvidia to create all of this.
So that should be a concern to Nvidia, right?
Yeah.
That its most recent highest end chip wasn't the one necessary to make a product such as this.
Yeah, and I'm also on that same front, though. I also am curious to hear, too. We're going to get some earnings out of the car makers. I think GM, of course, Tesla as well. And we also talk about some of these chips and just the technology, the AI technology being used, of course, with autonomous and assisted driving and other things like that. So we could actually get some interesting commentary out of those companies as well.
It's only Monday, guys. Unbelievable.
Is it? Are you sure?
It is only Monday.
Yeah.
Sorry. All right, guys.
But it's not bad. It's going to be exciting tomorrow, unless you have to go to a municipal bond conference.
Which I'm looking forward to from 10 to 12. So listen in on radio.
Okay, we will. All right, that's a wrap. Our cross-platform radio, TV, YouTube, Bloomberg Originals, folks. We call it the closing bell. We'll see you again. Same time, same place tomorrow.